and coordinating administering and coordinating a federal LSTA program, which is the Library Services and Technology Act. Our portfolio ranges from 4.5 million to 5 million. And in recent years, we've actually gotten up to 9 million annually due to CARES and ARPA funding. So that stimulus money went directly out to the libraries. And in this role, I've developed and implemented competitive grant opportunities, facilitated the review of applications, issued awards and agreements, and approved modifications and extensions for North Carolina's libraries and their grant applications. I'm excited to be speaking to you all today, and my experience in grants is directly related to my management of North Carolina's LSTA program. I likely have a very different perspective and point of view than, say, a program officer at a federal agency or even a grants administrator at a nonprofit. But my hope for today is that I'm able to help you communicate your needs to any potential grant funder, not just the state library. I aim to do this by connecting you to the reviewer and tying your project to goals throughout the proposal. And I know that many community college archives are administratively housed within the library for your college, which makes the archive eligible for LSTA grants. If your archive isn't housed administratively within the library, it's a separate unit, you wouldn't be able to directly apply for an LSTA grant, but you could partner with your college's library where the library is the applicant. Is anybody here part of an archive that isn't housed within the library? From what I could tell, in the community college system, it doesn't seem to be common. In the library. On your website, I went through a lot of them. It seemed like everybody was within the library. So that's really great for you all. So before I talk about writing a grant, I did just want to talk about what LSTA is. So LSTA funds are funds that are provided through the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, and LSTA is their largest grant portfolio, taking about 66% of their budget. So these funds provide funds to 59 state library agencies. These are the 50 states, Washington, D.C., our territories, and freely associated states. And so state library agencies have the ability to determine how they want to spend the funding, either through statewide initiatives or through sub-grant competitions. In North Carolina, we do both. We fund statewide initiatives, and we also fund competitive grants. So the amount that we get in our allotment is based off of a population formula. So, the census is very important, as it can help us increase the amount of funding that we get. And so the Museum and Library Services Act of 2018 amended and reauthorized IMLS to administer LSTA funds through 2025. So I'm sure you remember those Dear Appropriator letters regarding the Museum and Library Services Act. The act had actually lapsed for several years, but that didn't impair the ability to get funding. So LSTA is governed by federal statutes, and these statutes give us the purpose and how we can spend funds. So we have to spend 96 of the funds on 8 LSTA purposes, and these purposes are for improving library services, providing access to resources, resource sharing, and the other 4% can be spent on administration of the program. So that can go towards indirect costs, but also towards salaries for folks like me and the grants assistant in our program to administer all the aspects of a grant program. And the final aspect that the statute really outlines that for us to do is that we have to have a 5-year plan and a 5-year evaluation. Last year, we actually went through our 5-year evaluation for 2018 and the 2022 plan. And we have a new 5-year plan in place for 2023 and 2027. And these must support the 8 LSTA purposes. I'm going to talk about the goals in our 5-year plan coming up shortly. But I did just want to talk about our 8 LSTA purposes. These are things that libraries and archives do every day. We establish services for learning and access to information, providing that electronic access to materials, professional development for library workforce. We work with public, private, and local partnerships and collaborations. We work to provide services to those with diverse populations and for those who have difficulty using libraries. So these are things we do day in and day out. So they're very broad in nature, and much of the work that we do falls under these purposes already. So federal regulations govern how our program is administered. If you've ever managed a federal grant before, whether it's an LSTA project, a grant directly from IMLS, or from another federal agency like the National Endowment for the Humanities, we all follow the same regulations regarding the usage and management of grant funds, which is a uniform guidance to CFR 200. And in this lengthy code, it is long, is the administrative requirements, the cost principles, post-award requirements, and audit requirements. And so obviously we have our federal regulations, but there's also state and local statutes that also have to be followed. Federal regulations must always be followed, and more restrictive state or local regulations supersede the federal regulations to ensure that you're always compliant. So just keep that in mind as you are developing proposals, because oftentimes the state and local procedures are often more restrictive. What comes to mind is procurement. Federal thresholds are oftentimes higher than what the state thresholds are for procurement. So just make sure you're following the most restrictive rule. So the State Library is really excited about our new 5-year plan that starts this year. Awards that will be announced on June 6th will fall under this new plan. And we revised our goals in this plan to better serve North Carolina's libraries and our residents. So our first goal is community engagement. And our goal statement for that is North Carolina libraries will provide inclusive, user-focused services that enable community-wide growth and transformation. So under community engagement, we hope to see projects that impact the areas of lifelong learning, economic and employment development, human services, and civic engagement as being able to grow and transform our communities across the state. Our second goal is equitable access. And with equitable access, North Carolinians will have equitable access to information and technology needed to learn, live, govern, and work. And so we see that information access and institutional capacity projects are areas that we will see contributing to this goal. And our final goal is responsive organizations, that North Carolina libraries will be places that all people find welcoming and accessible through sustainable organization practices focused on inclusion, development, and community responsiveness. So projects that focus on institutional capacity will allow libraries to improve the library workforce, its infrastructure and operations, and allow libraries to be responsive community organizations. So I did just want to talk very briefly about our opportunities that we traditionally have. So we have a competitive program that opens typically in September, normally around the middle of the month. And we have 2 categories. They're easy grants and project grants. I'll talk about easy grants first, and this includes easy planning grants. So if you're looking to do a needs assessment or a strategic plan, that would fall under the easy planning. And for an easy grant, you can request between $5,000 and $50,000. And these grants are typically due on March the 1st. Our guidelines haven't been even written yet, so I can't say for sure, but generally that's when it is, and decisions would be announced in early June. So that would be June of 2024 in what we're looking at for the future. So easy is considered easy because it only has 1 step, as opposed to our project grants, which is a 2-step process, because they can request larger amounts between $50,000 and $100,000 dollars. We request a letter of intent, which is a abbreviated part of the application. We just want to know a quick snapshot of what you're doing, how you anticipate spending the funds, just to give us kind of a litmus test of if this project is viable. Oftentimes not too often, but sometimes we get letters of intent for things that fall outside the scope of LSTA. Maybe it's construction related, like establishing a new part of the library, and you want to tear down a wall and build a new wall. Unfortunately, LSTA can't be used for construction expenses. So that is something that we want to kind of weed out early, so we're not wasting your time in developing a full proposal. And again, the full application is due March 1 with the decisions announced in early June. So I want to move from the basics of what LSTA is into developing and writing your proposal. So as you're writing and developing your proposal, think about who will be reading it. Reviewers, particularly peer reviewers, are individuals who come from a broad range of institutions, who have related experience, are able to analyze narrative text against established criteria, and have a clear understanding of the funding entity. While you don't know exactly who may be reading your proposal, it's a safe assumption that the reviewer has a base level of understanding of the work that you do, but it isn't necessarily their area of focus. They're receptive to learning about you and your project, but they don't want to be confused. They're tasked with ensuring that proposals align with the program guidelines, which reflect the goals and values of the funder. So go ahead and take some time to go over the funder's webpage, which would be our webpage, but also any other grant that you're applying for. Take some time to do your homework up front, because they can provide you some great information on who potential reviewers might be, and they can also help you hone in on who the audience is that you're writing for. So when brainstorming ideas, staff and potential partners should be included. I've seen projects struggle to be implemented due to the lack of buy-in from project managers and partners when applications are top-down directives as opposed to collaborative efforts. So ideas that move forward into proposal development should align with your institutional goals, or at least the mission or vision of your institution. Reviewers are going to want to make a connection with why your organization is qualified to do this work, and part of that is ensuring the project is within the scope of your organization's long-term plan. Keep in mind that ideas that don't currently align with your organization doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just might not be an idea for using right now. Keep a list of ideas, and as your organization's priorities change, those ideas might come in handy. So ideas should be community focused. When I say community, think about the audiences and people that you serve. Communities go beyond geographic settings of populations and can be subsets of populations like K through 12 educators or LGBTQ plus people. They are often defined by race or ethnicity, professional or economic ties, religion, culture, or a shared background or interest. An example of a community-focused idea is creating tools and resources of your collection to increase access for students learning English for your unique and diverse archival materials. The community you are focused on would be the students learning English, and you could even go a step further and identify these students by age, group, grade, or education level. Some questions that you can ask as you are brainstorming are, what are your community's biggest challenges? What groups in your communities are most affected by these challenges? What are your communities and institutions' biggest assets for tackling these challenges? And what does success for your community look like? To further illustrate the relationship of goals, there should be a correlation between the goals of the project, the archival institution, and the funder. This relationship allows the reviewer to understand how the project not only will further the goals of the archive, but also for the funder. Remember, a key part of the reviewer's job is to make sure the proposal fits with the funder. So these are the main areas of the grant proposal that I'm going to discuss today. These are the key areas of our grant application, and these areas can be applied beyond just LSTA grants. Keep in mind that every application is different and could have asked for more or less than what I have here. There could be additional information needed like an abstract, cover letter, financial documents, letters of support, things of that nature. So the needs statement is the section that you will introduce the reviewer to the problem that the funding will solve. It is your job to establish the value of your project by clarifying the need or problem that your project responds to. The plan of work can also be called the project description, the project narrative, or the goals and objectives section. And this is where you will lay the solution and goals of your project. The evaluation can also be called the methodology section, and this is where you'll discuss what selection looks like and how you'll measure that success. The budget is the area that you will demonstrate the financial resources will be needed for success. So as you're working on the proposal itself, be sure to check in continuously with supervisors and grant offices in your institution. There could be institutional processes that need to occur before you need to get started. Questions like, are you allowed to apply? Does your institution's budget have the needed matching funds? How involved is your grants office? Are some questions that need to be answered. From my experience, the larger the institution, the more involved grants offices is. That's not surprising. Larger institution, the more staff capacity there is to be involved cross-departmentally. So just keep that in mind, but make sure you're checking in with the different divisions in your community college. In the needs statement, you're going to try to answer, what is the problem? Avoid describing the needs of your institution as the problem. Introduce your problem with facts and provide evidence of the need. Avoid circular reasoning like, the problem is we don't have a scanner, therefore the solution is to buy a scanner. There are a lot of great data sources out there to help you define your audience. And data can come from local and institutional sources like your strategic plan, a needs assessment, software, or government data sources like the Census, the North Carolina Department of Commerce, or Office of State Budget and Management. And the State Library website has community data sources listed on it and can be useful in identifying the community you want to impact. So don't assume that the reviewers know about your community. You need to inform them of who this funding will serve. So you'll want to choose your data sources to help show reviewers who the people in the community are. A colleague of mine likes to talk about grant writing with the SALT principle, meaning to give enough detail to make it interesting, but not too much to make it overseasoned. We don't need to make every data source and data element that is available. We just need enough information to make a connection with the reader. Another way to make data work for you is to use comparative data to compare your local data with the same data element at a comparable group, like at the national or state level. Using a short and concise story to demonstrate how the problem is impacting members in the community is a great way to connect with the reviewer and make a demonstrative case, because that can oftentimes tug on a heartstring, because reviewers are people. So remember that. To further connect the reviewer to the need, lending institutional credibility will help them assess the proposal. They should be able to know after reading the needs statement why you are best equipped to take on this project and why the project has to happen now. Once you have identified the need, you're going to want to spend the remainder of your proposal focusing on the solution. You'll want to answer the question, what do you need to solve the problem, and what happens when you do? Reviewers love to see that writers have done their homework and explored their options for implementation, and that they have discussed how a plan was determined. If you know of institutions that have done a similar project, research that project and learn what worked and what didn't, and talk about that in your plan. In the grants that I see, it is frequently discussed who is going to be doing the work that is described. Very rarely is it the case that an existing staff person is able to take on the additional work of a grant project without any impact of their current workload. We're all very busy, and having an additional project means that something's got to give. So make sure you're taking that into account when planning for staffing for a project. That's probably my biggest recommendation, is to always focus on who's going to do the work and what's got to give. So many applications require a timeline that lays out when project activities and milestones will be accomplished and by who. The timeline will help demonstrate what key tasks are needed to be done and if it's realistic and achievable. Often timelines that I see are overambitious and unrealistic in certain areas. One thing that I see a lot is that the hiring of staff is done within that first month. While that could happen in a perfect world, the reality is that is never the case. So here are some things to ask yourself. How long does it typically and realistically take to hire someone? How long to train and otherwise onboard them once they are hired? Are there certain times of the year where there are competing priorities? So for you all, I was thinking maybe that's finals, student orientation. Are there other times of the year that have competing priorities? And what are outside influences that might affect the project timeline? This could be things such as weather, identifying vendors. Can you think of other outside influences that could affect timelines? We've all recently been through one. It was a pandemic, so let's not use pandemic, but can you think of any other outside influences that could affect timelines? So depending on like the type of institution, it could be, especially at public libraries. I don't think with community colleges. Oh, reaccreditation, yes. But it could be getting approvals and authorizations to amend budgets. So if you are awarded funds in a new fiscal year, do you have to go to like college commissioners to get that budget approved or amended to get it to get things going? Things like getting that authorization from your grants office, those things are kind of outside forces outside of your control that could impact your timeline. So implementation of outcome-based evaluation is great. And across the board, outcomes are more and more common in grants. There have been several federal statutes that have implemented outcome-based evaluation. And so these are becoming very common across the board. So I did just want to talk about evaluation and what we expect to see. So inputs are the resources that are expended on a project. This can be things like funding, staffing, partner contributions, supplies, etc. And outputs is the level of service provided. As librarians, we are really, really great at gathering outputs. These are the quantifiable measurements like the number of consultations, number of scans, number of visits, etc. And outcomes are the benefits that will be produced as a result of the outputs. What achievements or changes in skills, knowledge, attitude, behavior, condition, or life status occurred for the participant. Part of having outcomes in a project includes a plan for assessing or measuring if outcomes were achieved. This could be done through surveys, interviews, focus groups, observation, or via mixed method. So there are times where outcomes aren't possible, and IMLS has a great statement on their webpage that I'm going to read that discusses how they view projects without outcomes. So IMLS supports basic research, organizational enhancements, and other activities intended to strengthen the ability of organizations to provide high-quality services. Such projects may be designed to extend a discipline's knowledge or to create tools to improve practice rather than produce immediately observable benefits for end users. IMLS supports such projects because it anticipates that they will contribute to making the lives better in the long term. In reporting results of such grants, IMLS wants you to know what you believe long-term benefits will be for library or museum users and their communities, and how those improvements will be recognized when they are achieved. I would challenge you, though, if you have identified a specific audience or community, I believe you can have an outcome for the project. Your evaluation and methodology section will describe to reviewers how to know success was achieved. As you develop your evaluation plan, don't be afraid to use a third-party expert. Most times this is an allowable expense. So I do want to introduce you to the idea of a logic model. There are many different versions of a logic model, and you might already have one that works for you, which is great. And a logic model takes the inputs, outputs, and outcomes and facilitates program planning and implementation. I found this example from Emory University's Rose Library Archives. It does a really great job of discussing how the logic model helped them and how they didn't start out using one. They were in a period of transition, and in order to get the project back on track, they needed a way to visualize the project. I think this is a really great way to get a blueprint of a project, even if it's just for internal use. I really appreciate that they stress that a logic model is an iterative tool and not meant to be prescriptive. Having adaptability as a project is implemented is one thing that I think is a key to success. If the past 3 years have shown us anything, is that we have the ability to adapt to changes. And this example is just one example of a logic model, and I'm going to stop sharing and pop over to that so we can see it. Okay, so this is Emory's discussion of a logic model. And they talk about kind of the experience of what they went through. So the first 2 pages is a narrative and how they ended up getting to a logic model. But you can see it's very simple. The way that they have it structured is just the inputs. So they talk about institution inputs, student groups, individuals, and resources. So like the physical spaces, collections, research capacity, so different inputs, and then they all have outputs. They did some subgrants. They did an asset mapping. They have an advisory group, the collection of materials on display, and then they all have outcomes. And they've correlated these outcomes back to the outputs where you can see these little numbers, those correlate with the outcomes. So they've enhanced the visibility of the archives. They've connected with the HIV/AIDS community to the university, and they are connecting the archives to the community and public spaces and bringing awareness of distrust between the biomedical and activist communities. So these are all different outcomes that they wanted to do in their proposal, and they were able to map it back to their outputs, and all these inputs help them achieve these goals. So it's a very simple model, but it's something that can help you kind of map what you were looking at. Okay, back to a slide. Okay, so let's talk about the budget. Admittedly, the budget is my favorite part of the grant proposal. This is where everything comes together for me. And just so you know, like I have Excel open every day and I'm running numbers every day. So I know that a lot of librarians are not numbers people like me, but I hope I can help you to be one. So I like to review the budget last, but some of my coworkers review the budget first because they want to know what they're getting into. But I like to review the budget last, and to me, it's like putting a bow on top of a present. The budget is a plan, and the budget should align with the goals and objectives that are stated in the narrative. So you'll want to align your costs with the narrative. And the worst part about reviewing a budget is when there are costs that are not mentioned at all in the narrative parts of the proposal. That's an immediate concern and deduction for the reviewer. So reviewers are going to assess your costs and ensure that they are reasonable. Reasonable means that any I hate to use the word in definition, but that any reasonable person would expect those costs to be appropriate. So are you buying a computer and it costs $10,000? That seems a little unreasonable, but if it's some sort of supercomputer and you go into detail, you're like, oh, I understand why this computer costs $10,000 as opposed to, a $1,200 computer. So doing your homework up front to get your appropriate quotes and estimates will pay off. That being said, funders know that costs change within reason, and you don't have to be on the penny accurate. While it seems really trivial to say this, check and recheck your math. Have somebody else check it. I have heard of applications being disqualified based off of budgetary errors. We aren't that strict at the state library, but other funders are. So just make sure you're double checking everything that you do. So this is my personal plea to you. Don't wait till the last minute to submit your grant. There's always something that could go wrong, and that could prevent you from a timely submission that falls outside of your control. This could be like a website's down, power, internet outages. Your file could be too big and you can't upload it. So, expect the unexpected. Murphy's Law, stuff happens. Insert your favorite saying here. It could happen. And then make sure you have your institutional approvals. Depending on your institution, there could be those offices of sponsored research and deans who have to sign off on any proposal. These approvals can often take days, if not weeks, to obtain. And then pull in outside reviewers. Have people who are involved in the project and even non-archivist folks to review your application. Your application should be written for those who aren't familiar with the topic to understand. So any major thing that I write, I often have my mom read it. She's a really great proofreader for grammatical errors and things like that. But I also want her to tell me if she knows what I'm trying to do, because she is not involved in the library field. She's not involved in grants. She's an insurance agent. So if she's able to tell me what I'm hoping to do, then I feel like I've achieved my goal. So I did just want to give you a list of some grant sources, and this list is by no means inclusive. It's just meant as a starting place. So we have federal grants, state grants, and other. So there are some professional organizations that you can get grants from, but also that you can search for grants from. Foundation Center, which has been around for quite some time, is now known as Candid. And there are some public libraries scattered across the state, and even community college libraries, that have access to this database that you can go to the library and just sit at a computer and do some research on some grants. So, I just wanted to give you these starting point for where to look for funding, but of course, LSTA is there. So I did just want to talk about how the state library now accepts grants. We have a grants management system. Its link is provided on our webpage. And so this is a cloud-based service. You go in and the application is there, and you can just type in the answers, or you can download a question list, work outside of the system, and go in and paste them into the form that is online. And then the awards are issued online also. through this system, and you can submit all your progress reports, final reports, reimbursement requests. Everything is managed within this system. So you have kind of an online file holder holding everything together for one award in one place. So we're going into our third year with this system, and we're really pleased with it. So as you're developing your project, I did just want to share a couple of tools with you. So everything that is funded through LSTA does get submitted through the state program report, which in my world, with all the 59 LSTA coordinators, we call the SPR. And everything that gets submitted to IMLS gets reviewed and approved and then becomes public. And so everything is public. And so I did just want to show you an example of a project that's in the SPR. And I tell you about the SPR because it can be a good starting point as you're working through ideas to see what folks have done before, and if they had any suggestions for how to improve. Okay, so I have already searched. I pulled up Surrey Community College's project, part of Digital Surrey. They were focusing on churches in the community in the 2019-2020 year. And they wanted to add to their digital collection things that related to the history of churches in Surrey County. So, you know, from 2019 to 2020, I'm sure you'll remember, was the start of the COVID. And so obviously there was very likely some impacts from that, but you can see the activities that they did. They digitized 2,835 items, and you can see who their partners were, where they did it, and they also have listed outcomes. So this is available with any project in the SPR, any outcomes that are previously not reported. So they were able to create a digital collection of 280 churches, and then also digitize church minutes dating back to the 1860s, and then the importance of these outcomes, and then significant lessons. The significant lessons section is my favorite part of the SPR. And, they talk about was the initial enthusiasm of the project of churches wanting to participate, and then that kind of fizzled out, and how to get those materials into the project. So, they just talk about how to market it. They said they didn't have anybody with a marketing plan, and so it was difficult to maintain public interest. So anything can go into these areas, but it's oftentimes can tell you what you might want to focus on if you're contemplating a similar project. And then also it has the person who was the project manager has their contact information. So if you wanted to reach out to somebody across the nation and be like, hey, I wanted to talk to you about your project, this is a great starting place of how you can learn about a project and what worked and what didn't, just to do that initial upfront research. And then the second tool that I wanted to talk about is the state library itself. So I'm a part of the library development section of the state library, and I have my coworkers. We're called consultants, and we are all available to review applications prior to submission. So if you have a finalized draft, then you submit it prior to like mid-February. Then we are happy to provide feedback and review those drafts to identify areas that could be improved, or to talk about potential weaknesses. And that's something that we do and that we enjoy. And then finally, I did just want to provide a link to our how to apply for LSTA grant. This page has our all our grant guidelines talking about allowable costs, unallowable costs, our selection criteria, including the rubric that we use, what cost share is, how to calculate matching. And so this changes every year. We update it. So I would hope you go and look at it every year as you are applying for grants, because there could be some changes from year to year, just kind of fine tuning and improving our program to make it a little bit easier every year. But I did just want to provide that link. And then finally, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. I'm happy to answer questions y'all might have.
Thank you, Catherine. Everybody, you're welcome to type in the chat, or you can unmute. You can use camera if you want. I was going to ask, will you be able to provide a copy of your slides or maybe a document with a list of resources to share?
Yes, I can definitely share my slides.
Okay, that would be awesome. Thank you. If nobody has any questions right now, I know I'm always really bad about saying, I don't have any questions, and then as soon as you sign off, something pops into my head. Would it be okay if folks contact you if they do think of something or if they need some advice? Oh, there we go. All right, I see your email in the chat there for anybody who needs it.
Of course. Sorry, I muted myself and then I lost the bar. But yes, happy to answer any questions at any time.
All right. Well, thank you. I know you're just as busy as we are. Everybody's so busy. I appreciate you taking the time to come and speak. And I know we've got a lot of folks who are going to enjoy and make good use of this recording too. So, all right.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Same to you.
Bye.
Bye.